Lighthouses, the Intuitive Canine Series, by Catherine Walton. Chapter 1, Whispers by the Waves. The sea had always been a comfort to Debbie. The gentle rush of waves, the salty breeze, and the rhythm of the tides were a therapeutic respite from the bustling town life. It was no wonder that after the tumultuous events of the previous months, she decided a break was long overdue. The small seaside village she chose for her retreat was picturesque, framed by rocky cliffs on one side and a vast expanse of shimmering ocean on the other. Nestled in a quaint cottage not far from the shore, Debbie felt the weight of the town's memories slowly lifting. Every evening, as the sun began its descent, casting a golden hue over the waters, Debbie would leash up her two loyal Labradors, Shadow and Halo, for their ritualistic walk. Shadow, with his sleek black coat, was the more serious of the two. He walked with purpose, every step measured, eyes always scanning the surroundings. Halo, the mischievous yellow Labrador, was his perfect counter. He was constantly distracted, his nose digging into everything and his tail wagging at every new sight or smell. One such evening, their wandering feet and paws led them towards an old weathered lighthouse that stood tall against the backdrop of the setting sun. Its once white exterior was chipped, revealing layers of stories from years past. An ancient beacon of hope, the lighthouse still cast its light far and wide, a silent guardian of the seas. As they approached, Debbie noticed a group of locals huddled near the entrance, their voices low, forming a symphony of hushed whispers. She caught snippets of their conversation, words like not natural, bad omen, and selling out floating towards her. The heaviness of their tone and the urgency of their discussion was palpable, and it was clear that something was amiss. Intrigued, Debbie decided to approach, but not before signaling Shadow and Halo to stay by her side. "Evening, folks," she greeted warmly, attempting to ease into the conversation. A middle-aged woman with deep-set blue eyes and streaks of gray in her tied-back hair turned to face Debbie. "Oh, you're the newcomer, aren't you? Staying at Mariner's cottage?" she asked, not unkindly. Debbie nodded. "Yes, I'm Debbie. Just here for a short break. Couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation. Is everything okay?" The woman hesitated for a moment, exchanging glances with the others in the group. "It's the lighthouse," she began, her voice tinged with worry. "There have been rumors, talks of selling it to developers from the city. And then there are the tales of it being haunted." Halo, ever curious, began sniffing around, drawing the attention of a young boy who had been listening intently to the adults. The boy approached Halo, gently patting his head and smiling. Shadow, true to his nature, remained rooted by Debbie's side, his gaze unwavering. "Haunted?" Debbie inquired, a mix of skepticism and intrigue in her voice. The woman nodded. "For as long as I can remember, there have been tales of eerie happenings, strange noises, and fleeting shadows. Most of us never believed them. Until recently." A chill ran down Debbie's spine. The setting sun, the whispering waves, and tales of a haunted lighthouse. It was all eerily captivating. And though she was here for relaxation, the mystery lover in her couldn't resist. "Would you mind telling me more?" she asked, the promise of a new adventure twinkling in her eyes. The group exchanged glances once more, seemingly weighing the decision. The woman finally sighed. "Come along then, newcomer. Let's find a quiet spot. It's a long tale, and if you're willing to listen, we're willing to tell." As the group began to move, Halo's playful bark echoed, breaking the tension. It seemed the seaside village held mysteries that even a retired baker and her two Labradors couldn't resist. Chapter 2, The Keeper's Keeper. After finding a cozy spot at a nearby cafe, Debbie, the locals, and her two Labradors settled in. The ambiance was charming with fairy lights twinkling above and the gentle sound of waves lapping against the shore. But despite the warm surroundings, there was a palpable tension in the air. The woman Debbie had spoken to earlier introduced herself as Maggie. She signaled to a tall, slender figure hunched over at a corner table, engrossed in a newspaper. "That's Ben," Maggie whispered. "He's been the lighthouse keeper for as long as anyone can remember. If you want the true story of the lighthouse, he's the man." Debbie approached Ben, Shadow and Halo in tow. As they drew near, Ben slowly looked up, his deep-set eyes framed by wrinkles that spoke of age and experience. They glistened with both wisdom and a hint of sorrow. "Here you want to know about the lighthouse," Ben rasped, his voice like gravel but not unfriendly. Debbie nodded. "Yes, I've heard tales. I was hoping you might shed some light." Ben leaned back, stroking his grizzled beard. "Been working there all my life, just like my father before me and his father before him. That lighthouse isn't just a tower, it's a keeper of secrets, tales, and sometimes, they say, souls." Halo, sensing the gravity of the moment, lay down quietly beside Debbie, while Shadow sat, alert as always, waiting for Ben to continue. "Many years ago," Ben began, "there was a tale of a shipwreck right off the coast here. A fierce storm had taken the ship by surprise. The lighthouse did its best to warn them, but fate had other plans. The ship went down, and with it, many souls. They say, on certain nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear their cries." Debbie shivered, looking out to the sea, trying to imagine that tragic night. "But," Ben continued, "that's not all. Recently, there have been disturbances. Lights flickering, strange shadows moving across the walls, and sometimes cold drafts in rooms that should be sealed tight." Maggie interjected. "That's why many believe the place is haunted, and it's not helping with the developers circling like vultures." Ben's face tightened at the mention of the developers. "They've been here for months, wanting to buy the lighthouse, wanting to turn a place of history and soul into a luxury hotel." His voice trembled with anger. "Over my dead body," he muttered. Shadow, picking up on the charged emotions, let out a soft whine, nudging Ben's hand with his nose, as if to offer comfort. Debbie, sensing the depth of Ben's connection to the lighthouse, gently asked, "Have there been confrontations?" Ben sighed. "Words have been exchanged. They've made generous offers, but you can't put a price on heritage. I've refused every time. But lately, the disturbances have increased, almost as if something or someone is trying to drive me out." Debbie considered this, her detective instincts buzzing. "Do you think it's possible someone's trying to use the haunting tales to their advantage, to push you out?" Ben looked at her, eyes sharp. "Hadn't thought of it that way. But it's a possibility. A lot of money is at stake, after all." The conversation was interrupted by Halo's sudden bark. He'd found a new playmate, a local child, and was happily chasing a ball thrown towards the beach. The scene lightened the atmosphere, offering a brief reprieve from the heavy discussion. As the evening drew to a close, Debbie knew she was entangled in another mystery, one that involved ghosts of the past and very real threats of the present. She stood up, ready to head back to her cottage. "Thank you, Ben," she said, extending her hand. "I think my stay here might be more eventful than I planned." Ben chuckled, shaking her hand firmly. "With that old lighthouse?" "Always is." Chapter 3. Shadows in the Stairwell. The soft hum of the evening tide and the distant cries of gulls were a stark contrast to the shocking scream that cut through the tranquil night. The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls of the seaside cottages and causing Debbie to jolt upright in bed. Halo and Shadow, already alert from the scream, barked in unison, their anxious eyes fixed on Debbie. They seemed to understand that something was gravely amiss. Without hesitation, Debbie, clad in her nightgown, snatched a flashlight from the bedside table, strapped on her sandals, and with the Labradors closely behind, dashed out into the chilly night towards the source of the scream, the lighthouse. As she approached, the rotating light from the lighthouse's lantern room painted strobing arcs across the beach, giving an eerie ambience to the setting. Debbie's heart raced. She had a sinking feeling that she knew who she might find. At the base of the lighthouse's spiraling stairwell, illuminated intermittently by the lighthouse's light, lay the crumpled body of Ben. His weathered face, which earlier had been animated with tales and emotion, now looked eerily placid. Around him, village locals had begun to gather, their faces etched with shock and sorrow. Halo, sensing the gravity of the scene, let out a low whine, while Shadow, always the detective, began sniffing around. Maggie was kneeling beside Ben, tears streaking her face, her fingers faintly grasping for a pulse she probably knew she wouldn't find. Debbie moved closer, her trained eyes immediately surveying the scene. The top few steps of the lighthouse looked slick, possibly wet, but there hadn't been any rain. A dropped lantern, its flame extinguished, lay a few feet from Ben's outstretched hand. It looks like he slipped, stuttered a villager, his voice quivering. But Debbie wasn't convinced. With Ben's extensive experience with the lighthouse, such a mistake seemed unlikely. She discreetly noticed a scuff mark on one of the shoes, perhaps from a struggle. Suddenly, Shadow began to bark fervently, drawing the attention of the gathered crowd. He was focused on a darkened corner near the entrance of the lighthouse, where a shadow seemed to dance independently of any light. As Debbie approached the spot, flashlight in hand, the shadow seemed to retreat, revealing a dropped handkerchief monogrammed with an ornate. It was damp and had a faint, strange odor. Chloroform, perhaps? She discreetly bagged the handkerchief, deciding to keep it under wraps until she had more information. Turning back to the gathering, she met the worried eyes of the villagers. "We need to call the authorities," she declared. "But I also think this wasn't a simple accident." Maggie nodded gravely. "With the developers lurking around, trying to get their hands on this land, I wouldn't be surprised if foul play was involved." The atmosphere grew colder as the weight of Ben's death and the possibility of a murderer among them settled in. The group began to disperse, casting suspicious glances at one another. Debbie, however, stayed a while longer, sitting on the chilly steps of the lighthouse with Halo and Shadow on either side. The waves whispered secrets, and the lighthouse cast its rotating gaze across the vast, dark ocean. The mystery of the lighthouse had deepened, and Debbie knew she was once again in the midst of a puzzle that demanded to be solved. She stared out into the night, the wind tangling her hair, as she mentally prepared herself for the investigation that lay ahead. Chapter 4: Strangers on the Shore. The morning sun painted a rosy hue across the village, contrasting sharply with the solemn atmosphere that had descended since Ben's untimely demise. Debbie decided to make her way to the local cafe, the Salty Sip, hoping to gather information and perhaps find some solace in a hot cup of coffee. Shadow and Halo trotted by her side, always vigilant and sensing the shift in the air. As she entered, the cozy aroma of brewing coffee enveloped her. Locals huddled at tables, their hushed conversations buzzing like a nest of wasps. They acknowledged Debbie with nods, their eyes filled with a mix of grief and apprehension. At a corner table, Debbie spotted a familiar face, Maggie. With her were 3 unfamiliar faces, each engaged deeply in conversation. As she approached, Maggie waved her over. "Debbie," she began, "let me introduce you to a few newcomers in our village." Eliza, a tall, poised woman with sleek black hair and a businesslike demeanor, extended a manicured hand. "Eliza Turner," she said with a bright, if slightly forced smile. "I'm a realtor from the city. It's tragic about Ben. I had hoped to discuss some property matters with him." Next to her sat Martin, a middle-aged man with a wild beard and round spectacles that magnified his inquisitive eyes. His fingers were stained with ink, and he clutched a leather-bound journal. Martin Green, historian and, well, some call me an occult enthusiast, he said with a wink. The lighthouse has a fascinating history, and I'm here to uncover it. Lastly, a woman with a dreamy expression, her curly hair tied in a loose bun, and paint stains on her hands, smiled gently. Nora, she said softly, I've been painting the lighthouse for weeks now. It has such a unique aura. It's heartbreaking to think of what happened to Ben. Debbie's gaze lingered on each of them. Eliza's presence was the most obvious with the lighthouse under potential sale. She would certainly be interested. Martin's interest in the occult intrigued Debbie. What might he know of the lighthouse's rumored hauntings? And Nora, with her artistic sensitivity, might have seen or sensed something others missed. Halo, ever mischievous, sauntered over to Martin's side, sniffing at his leather bag. A soft thud indicated a book dropping, and Halo playfully nudged it with his nose, revealing its title, Lighthouses and Legends, Coastal Mysteries. Martin chuckled, patting Halo's head. Seems he's a fan of history, too. Shadow, meanwhile, had found a spot next to Nora, his calm demeanor a clear sign of approval. Each of them arrived shortly before Ben's. Incident, Maggie whispered to Debbie. It's odd, don't you think? All suddenly drawn to the lighthouse. Debbie sipped her coffee, her mind racing. Each newcomer had a reason to be near the lighthouse, but did any of them have a reason to want Ben out of the picture? Ben spoke of developers wanting the lighthouse. Debbie mused aloud. Eliza shifted uncomfortably. I had investors interested, yes, she admitted. But Ben's death doesn't benefit me. Now, with all the rumors and mystery, they might back out. As the group continued to chat, Debbie's mind was hard at work. She had pieces of a puzzle, but wasn't quite sure how they fit. She decided that over the next few days, she'd get to know each of these newcomers a little better. With Shadow and Halo by her side, she felt confident that no secret would remain hidden for long. Chapter 5. The Canine's Canvas. The day after their meeting at the Salty Sip, Debbie decided to visit the shoreline, where she'd often spotted Nora painting. The gentle ebb and flow of waves, coupled with the towering presence of the lighthouse, always offered a serene setting. Halo and Shadow, tails wagging, raced along the water's edge, playing catch with the driftwood. Approaching Nora's usual spot, Debbie found an array of canvases lined up, showcasing various views of the lighthouse. The artist herself was engrossed, her brush moving gracefully over a canvas. However, as Debbie watched, Halo, always one to find trouble, accidentally stepped on a tube of blue paint. The mischievous lab trotted over to one of the canvases, leaving a trail of smeared prints behind. Oh no! Halo, Debbie exclaimed, rushing to intercept her playful pet. Nora, I'm so sorry. Nora set down her brush and hurried over, eyes widening at the sight. Oh dear, that was a piece I've been working on for weeks, she said, sounding more resigned than angry. But as Debbie moved to help clean the smudged canvas, her eyes caught something peculiar. Beneath the fresh streaks of paint, faintly sketched, were a series of numbers and letters, unmistakably coordinates. Nora, Debbie began hesitantly, pointing at the hidden markings. What are these? Nora blinked in surprise, leaning closer to examine the numbers. I don't know. I never sketched that. I bought this canvas at an old art store in town. It must have been there before. Shadow, sensing the change in mood, trotted over, his deep black coat shining in the sun. His dark eyes seemed to focus intently on the canvas, his sharp instincts picking up on Debbie's interest. Eliza and Martin, having heard the commotion, approached from a distance. Eliza raised an eyebrow. What's got everyone so intrigued? Martin adjusted his glasses, squinting at the canvas. Coordinates, by the looks of it. Perhaps a location? His historian instincts kicked in. Coordinates often have historic significance. They could lead to buried artifacts or forgotten landmarks. Debbie jotted down the numbers. Could they be related to the lighthouse? She wondered aloud. Nora, still taken aback, shook her head. I just paint what I see and feel. I don't know anything about coordinates. Eliza, ever the practical one, pulled out her phone. Let's see where these lead. After a few taps, her eyes widened slightly. They point to a location just offshore, perhaps on a hidden part of the seabed. A thoughtful silence settled on the group. Could the coordinates lead to a hidden treasure or a relic from the past? Did it have something to do with Ben's demise? Perhaps, Martin murmured, his face thoughtful. This is the real reason behind the recent interest in the lighthouse and its surrounding area. The day had taken an unexpected turn. Halo, oblivious to the significance of his mischief, wagged his tail and played in the waves, while Shadow kept a watchful eye on the group, sensing the importance of the moment. Debbie folded the note with the coordinates. She knew she had just uncovered a significant clue, and it was up to her, with the help of her loyal Labradors, to see where it would lead. As the sun began its descent, casting a golden hue over the lighthouse, Debbie felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The coordinates, she felt, were just the beginning. Chapter 6: Beneath the Beacon. The next morning, a sense of adventure hung in the air. Debbie, equipped with the coordinates and a determination to delve deeper into the mystery, decided to explore the lighthouse's interior. Both Halo and Shadow seemed to pick up on her excitement, Shadow with his usual sober intensity, and Halo bounding around energetically. As they climbed the spiral staircase, Debbie's hand glided along the cold metal railing. Every step echoed the rich history of the place. When they reached the beacon room, the first rays of morning light poured through the large windows, creating dancing patterns on the floor. Shadow, having always possessed an uncanny sense for the unusual, began to sniff around a seemingly inconspicuous corner of the room. Debbie observed him, her curiosity piqued. The Labrador's nose led him to a part of the floor that appeared slightly different from the rest, a tile with a faint, almost imperceptible marking of an anchor. Halo, curious about what his brother was fussing over, pranced over, accidentally stepping on the marked tile. To Debbie's astonishment, it sank under his weight, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Halo, looking slightly baffled by his own discovery, stepped back, allowing Debbie to lean down and inspect it. Inside the compartment lay an old, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the leather was worn and cracked in places, suggesting its antiquity. Debbie carefully picked it up, reverence in her touch. The journal's first page was inscribed with elegant, flowing handwriting. Log of Captain Elias Hawthorne, 1823. Flipping through, Debbie was drawn into tales of Captain Hawthorne's maritime adventures. But as she reached the middle of the journal, a particular entry caught her eye. July 7, 1823. The storm last night was unlike any I've seen. Our ship was battered, and we sought refuge near the coastline. Here, under the watchful gaze of the village lighthouse, I decided to bury it the treasure we acquired from the Spanish vessel. Its location is marked by the beacon's light during the midnight tide. Only the light's keeper will discern its secrets. A gasp escaped Debbie's lips. Could it be? A genuine treasure, hidden somewhere nearby, guided by the light of this very lighthouse? Debbie realized the gravity of her discovery. This wasn't just about a hidden treasure. It was about preserving the history and legacy of the village. The developers, if they found out, would surely tear the place apart. Suddenly, Debbie's previous encounters made sense. The tension among the locals, the disagreements Ben had with the developers, the mysterious coordinates on Nora's canvas, and Martin's interest in the history of the place. Shadow, with his usual calm demeanor, sat by Debbie's side as she pored over the journal, while Halo's attention seemed to be on a seagull that dared to perch on the window ledge. The Labradors, in their own ways, complimented Debbie's journey, grounding her when the enormity of the situation threatened to be overwhelming. Determined to protect the village's heritage, Debbie decided she would find the treasure. But she would need help, both from the loyal Labradors by her side and from the village's residents, who, she hoped, would understand the significance of her discovery. As she stepped out of the beacon room, journal in hand, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mystery of the lighthouse was unraveling, and she was at the heart of it. With Shadow and Halo leading the way, the quest for Captain Hawthorne's treasure had truly begun. Chapter 7. The Baking Distraction. As the waves gently lapped at the shore and seagulls sang their endless songs, the usually quiet seaside village bustled with activity. Tents were erected, children laughed and played, and the unmistakable aroma of baked goods wafted through the air. Debbie had decided to revive an old village tradition, a beachside bake sale. But while the crumbly pies, moist cakes, and buttery pastries were real, the bake sale itself had an ulterior motive. With Halo and Shadow at her side, Debbie began setting up her own stall. She displayed her renowned blueberry muffins, chocolate chip cookies, and her signature apricot scones. People began to trickle in, their faces lighting up at the sight of Debbie's baked creations. It was the perfect setting to engage in casual conversations, and that's exactly what Debbie intended. She chatted with village regulars, listened to their stories, and subtly slipped in mentions of the lighthouse and its mysteries. While most were taken aback, having no knowledge about any treasure, a few had intriguing reactions. Martin, the historian, looked particularly contemplative. "Captain Hawthorne, you say? Interesting. He's a legend around these parts. Some say he was just a myth, but I've always believed there was more to his story." Nora, still a tad miffed about her ruined canvas, but appreciative of Debbie's apology in the form of a batch of cookies, remarked, "You know, the lighthouse has always inspired my art. It feels alive in a way, as if it holds secrets." But it was Eliza's reaction that truly piqued Debbie's interest. The ambitious realtor, upon hearing the treasure whispers, tried to maintain her composure, but a flash of greed momentarily darkened her eyes. "Treasure? In our village? Why, that would surely raise property values." As the day wore on and the sun cast a golden hue over the horizon, the bake sale was in full swing. Children ran around with sticky fingers, villagers chatted and laughed, and amidst it all, Debbie, Halo, and Shadow observed and interacted. Halo, in his usual mischievous self, would occasionally snatch a muffin or two when no one was looking, much to Debbie's playful chagrin. Meanwhile, Shadow took his self-imposed role as the guardian of the stall very seriously. His eyes constantly scanning the crowd, his ears perked up, alert to every conversation. By the time the bake sale ended and the villagers began packing up, Debbie felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had a trove of insights, observations, and subtle clues. But most importantly, she knew that Eliza, with her keen interest in the property values of the village, would likely play a significant role in the unfolding mystery. As the night enveloped the village, the lighthouse stood tall and proud, its light piercing the darkness. Debbie looked at it, a beacon of hope and history, and made a silent promise to uncover its secrets and protect the village's legacy. With Halo and Shadow at her side, she felt confident that the truth, whatever it may be, would soon come to light. Chapter 8. Tales of Treachery. A brisk wind swept through the village, carrying with it the scent of the briny sea and distant memories of the past. As the sun settled below the horizon, Debbie found herself at the local tavern, the Salty Siren. She had been directed there by a few villagers who told her it was the best place to hear the old legends of the village and the lighthouse. Halo and Shadow, after a day full of excitement, lay snoozing comfortably in their makeshift beds at the inn. The tavern was filled with the rich amber glow of lanterns, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sea shanties played in the background as the boisterous laughter of sailors and villagers alike filled the air. At the bar, Debbie sat next to an elderly man, his face a map of wrinkles, each telling a story of its own. This was Captain Alastair, a retired sailor and the unofficial historian of the village. Over mugs of warm ale, Captain Alastair began narrating the tale of the lost treasure. Centuries ago, he began, a ship named the Whispering Wraith was said to be carrying a treasure beyond imagination: gold, jewels, and artifacts collected from the four corners of the world. But as fate would have it, a storm unlike any other rose from the depths, and the Whispering Wraith met its doom off our very coast. Debbie leaned in, her curiosity piqued. The captain continued. The few survivors spoke of the treasure being saved and hidden in a place where only the bravest would dare to look. And that, dear lady, was when our lighthouse was built. Not just as a beacon for lost ships, but as a guardian of the village's deepest secret. The captain paused, taking a sip of his ale, his eyes distant, lost in the annals of time. The lighthouse keepers were not just caretakers of the light, but they were also the guardians of this secret. Each keeper passed on the tale and the responsibility to the next, ensuring that the treasure remained a legend, never to be found. Debbie considered this. So, Ben must have known about the treasure. Captain Alastair nodded slowly. Aye, that he did. And there were whispers that he had been approached by outsiders, offering vast sums to learn its location. The implications hung heavily in the air. As the night deepened, Debbie thanked Captain Alastair for his tale and headed back to the inn. Halo and Shadow, sensing her return, greeted her with sleepy eyes and wagging tails. But as she settled in for the night, Debbie's mind was alive with possibilities. If Ben had indeed been the guardian of a long-lost treasure, his death could be more than just a tragic accident. And with outsiders like Eliza and Martin in the village, the list of suspects had grown. The lighthouse, standing tall against the backdrop of the stars, now seemed even more enigmatic. It was not just a beacon guiding ships home. It was the keeper of a tale of treachery, lost treasures, and mysteries waiting to be unraveled. And with Halo and Shadow by her side, Debbie was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. Chapter 9: A Historian's Hunch. The next morning, the village awoke to a misty dawn. Seagulls cawed overhead, and the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore set a calming ambiance. Debbie, sipping her morning tea at the inn's balcony, contemplated the revelations of the previous night. Suddenly, a shadow approached from the street. It was Martin, his usually sharp features looking wearied, and his eyes deep with a restless urgency. Halo, sensing the tension in the air, gave a low growl, while Shadow stared intently at the historian. "May I?" Martin asked, pointing to the empty chair across Debbie. She nodded, her curiosity overtaking any reservations she might have had. "I watched you at the tavern last night, listening to Captain Alastair's tales. And I believe you're not just here for the sea breeze and pastries." Debbie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "I've spent years researching the legend of the Whispering Wraith and the Lighthouse's hidden treasure," Martin began, his voice low and earnest. "My findings have led me to believe that the legend isn't just a bedtime story for sailors. It's real, and the lighthouse holds the key." Debbie recalled the hidden compartment in the beacon room and the old journal hinting at the treasure. "What makes you think Ben had found its location?" Martin leaned in, A few days ago, I saw Ben at the break of dawn, examining an old maritime map at the base of the lighthouse. His excitement was palpable. I approached him, offering my expertise, but he was hesitant, almost protective. He mentioned that he was on the brink of a monumental discovery. Halo, ever the mischievous one, tried to nibble on Martin's leather bag, drawing a brief chuckle from the historian. He continued, I believe someone else saw this interaction, someone who realized the magnitude of Ben's discovery. And they might have gone to great lengths, even murder, to ensure they got to the treasure first. Debbie pondered over Martin's words. The idea of a hidden treasure was enthralling, but it also cast a shadow of greed and deceit over the village. Who else knows about this? Martin hesitated, then whispered, Eliza. I've seen her snooping around the lighthouse. Her pretense might be the property's development, but her real interest lies in the buried riches. Debbie remembered the overly curious realtor from the bake sale. And you? Where do your loyalties lie? Martin looked deep into Debbie's eyes, his gaze sincere. I'm a historian, Mrs. Debbie. My interest is in discovery and knowledge, not gold or jewels. If the treasure does exist, it belongs in a museum, not in the pockets of avaricious souls. Debbie considered Martin's words, weighing the sincerity in his voice against the swirling suspicions in her mind. All right, Martin. We'll search for the treasure together, but if I sense any deceit, our partnership ends. He nodded in agreement, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. As the duo plotted their next moves, Halo and Shadow played nearby, their playful antics reminding Debbie that, amidst the mysteries and dangers, there was still innocence and joy to be found. And she was determined to keep it that way. Chapter 10. Beachside Betrayal. Sunset painted the village in hues of orange and purple, the quiet rustling of waves merging harmoniously with the distant chatter of villagers. Along the shore, little stalls were set up with colorful umbrellas, selling sea trinkets, fresh fish, and other local goods. In the midst of this, a cozy picnic area was getting lively as residents gathered for an evening bonfire, a monthly tradition. Debbie, with Halo and Shadow frolicking around her, decided to take a stroll along the coastline, hoping the sea breeze might provide some clarity amidst the complexities of the lighthouse mystery. As she wandered further from the gathering, she noticed two figures standing close to the pier, engrossed in a hushed conversation. Drawing nearer, she recognized one of them as Eliza with her stark red hair, and the other, from town gossip, was Douglas Harnett, a notorious land developer known for his aggressive acquisition strategies. Trying not to attract attention, Debbie settled behind a wooden boat, Halo and Shadow obediently by her side. She strained her ears to catch fragments of the conversation. If you can ensure the land is mine, the commission will be more than generous. Douglas's deep voice carried a hint of impatience. Eliza replied, a touch of anxiety evident. I told you. With Ben gone, it's only a matter of time. The villagers are scared, thinking the place is haunted. They'll be more than willing to sell. But what about the treasure rumors? Won't they hike up the price if they believe gold's buried somewhere? Douglas quizzed. A smirk played on Eliza's lips. Let them believe what they want. Once the property is ours, so is whatever's hidden beneath. Debbie's heart raced. She had her suspicions, but hearing Eliza's covert plans cemented them. Gathering her courage, she stepped out, her loyal Labradors flanking her. Eliza, she called out, voice steady. Eliza and Douglas turned, their faces momentarily masked with surprise. Douglas's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Who's this? Debbie, Eliza answered, trying to mask her unease. She's new here. Debbie fixed her gaze on Eliza. Planning on selling our village's heritage, are we? Eliza scoffed. The lighthouse is old, Debbie, a relic. We're simply thinking of the village's future. And was Ben's death part of the future planning too? Debbie retorted, eyes flashing. For a brief moment, Eliza's confident demeanor wavered. I didn't harm Ben. He and I disagreed, but I would never hurt him. Douglas, sensing the tension and seeing no value in the confrontation, chimed in. Regardless, Mrs. Debbie, the Lighthouse's fate is a business transaction, nothing personal. Halo growled, sensing the thinly veiled threat in his tone. Shadow, on the other hand, stood tall and observant, his keen eyes watching every move. Debbie took a deep breath. The lighthouse isn't just a piece of property, Mr. Harnett. It's the heart of this village, filled with memories, legends, and perhaps secrets that need protection. Eliza eyed her warily. Why are you so interested in the lighthouse? You're not even from here. Debbie stepped closer, voice low. I've seen enough to know when something's amiss. And trust me, I intend to find out what's going on. With a final defiant look, Debbie turned, walking back toward the bonfire, Halo and Shadow by her side. The whispers of the waves now held a promise of vow to uncover the truth and protect the village's soul. Chapter 11. Moonlit Discoveries. The inky canvas of the night sky was peppered with twinkling stars, the moon casting a silvery glow upon the village. Debbie stood at the entrance of her rented cottage, a map spread out on the table in front of her. The coordinates she had discovered, thanks to Halo's accidental artistry, pointed to an area just below the lighthouse, by the cliffs. Dressed in a warm jacket and with a flashlight in hand, she whispered to her dogs, "Ready for an adventure?" Both Labradors wagged their tails in unison, their eyes shining with anticipation. The trio made their way silently toward the cliffs, avoiding the central village paths. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its beacon casting long, rotating beams of light across the sea. Its rhythmic hum was oddly comforting, in stark contrast to the mystery they were about to delve into. Halo and Shadow seemed particularly excited, their noses to the ground, leading Debbie closer to the cliffs. As they approached the edge, Shadow began to whimper and scratch at a seemingly random spot. Halo joined in, and together they uncovered a hidden entrance to a cave, cleverly concealed by overgrown shrubbery and rocks. Heart-pounding, Debbie shone her flashlight into the cave's mouth. It revealed a winding passage that seemed to lead beneath the lighthouse. Taking a deep breath for courage, she ventured in, with her ever-loyal canine companions by her side. The inside of the cave was cooler, the air thick with the smell of salt and dampness. Stalactites hung precariously from the roof, and the sound of dripping water echoed throughout the cave. As they ventured deeper, the walls began to narrow until they opened up into a larger chamber. The beam from Debbie's flashlight landed on an ornate wooden chest, its surface adorned with intricate carvings of ships and sea monsters. For a moment, Debbie's heart soared. Could this be the long-lost treasure? But as she approached and carefully lifted the chest's lid, her hopes were dashed. It was empty. Not a single coin or jewel in sight. Dejected, she sat back on her heels. Halo, sensing her disappointment, nuzzled her hand, while Shadow sniffed around the chest, barking softly as he discovered something. Beneath the chest was a carved indentation in the shape of a book. Could it be? Debbie wondered aloud, tracing the carving with her fingers. It hinted at the possibility that the true treasure wasn't gold or jewels, but perhaps knowledge, or a secret that needed to be protected. As the realization washed over her, a sudden noise from the entrance of the cave made her heart stop. Shadow's ears perked up, and Halo's stance turned defensive. The distant sound of footsteps and muffled voices grew louder. Someone else knew about the cave and was coming. Debbie quickly closed the chest and, with Halo and Shadow leading the way, sought an alternate exit. They navigated through a narrower passage, which eventually led them to another exit, opening up on the other side of the cliffs. Emerging from the cave and back under the moonlit sky, Debbie took a moment to catch her breath. The puzzle pieces were slowly coming together, But there were still many gaps to be filled. She knew that the empty chest and the book-shaped carving held significant clues. She decided that the next day she would pay another visit to Martin, the historian. Perhaps he might shed some light on the mystery of the empty chest and the carved indentation. With the moon as their guide, Debbie, Halo, and Shadow made their way back to their temporary home, the night's adventure etched in their memories. Chapter 12. Nora's Navigations. Morning had broken, casting the seaside village in a warm, golden hue. Birds chirped, their melodies blending with the distant sound of waves. Yet, despite the serene surroundings, a restless energy bubbled within Debbie. She knew she needed answers. The empty chest, the book-shaped carving, and now the connection of the coordinates to Nora's canvas. It all seemed to be part of an intricate tapestry, and she was determined to unravel it. Debbie decided to pay a visit to Nora, the artist with a deep-rooted connection to the lighthouse. Her quaint cottage, adorned with seashells and driftwood, stood on the outskirts of the village. As Debbie approached, the smell of fresh paint and turpentine wafted through the air. Before she could knock, Halo, ever the mischievous one, bounded forward and nosed open an ajar window, peeking inside with wide-eyed curiosity. Debbie, slightly embarrassed, called out, "Nora? It's Debbie. May I come in?" There was a brief pause, then the door opened to reveal the artist. Nora's usually bright eyes looked tired, but she managed a weak smile. "Of course, Debbie. Come in." Debbie, Halo, and Shadow entered the eclectic living space filled with canvases in various stages of completion, brushes, and paints scattered haphazardly. In the center of the chaos was a work in progress of the lighthouse, eerily lifelike under the moonlit night. Clearing her throat, Debbie began, "Nora, I found something in a hidden cave beneath the lighthouse, something that connects back to one of your paintings." She then recounted her midnight adventure. Nora's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "I never wanted any of this to come to light. I hoped that with Ben gone, the secret would be buried forever." Debbie leaned forward, anticipation building. "What secret, Nora?" Taking a deep breath, Nora began her tale. "Many don't know this, but I was more than just an artist inspired by the lighthouse. I was Ben's apprentice. We shared a passion for the legends surrounding the lighthouse, and together we pieced together clues, which eventually led us to the treasure." Her voice tinged with sadness. She continued, "But once we found it, we realized its significance was far beyond its material value. We feared it would attract the wrong attention, lead to greed and possibly violence." With tears in her eyes, Nora revealed, "We decided to re-hide it. I painted the coordinates subtly in one of my canvases, intending for it to be a failsafe, a way to remember its location. But now, with Ben gone and the treasure's secret exposed, I fear what might come next." Debbie reached out, placing a comforting hand on Nora's arm. "Then let's find it and ensure it's protected, once and for all." Nora nodded, her determination evident. "Yes, but we need to be careful. The treasure is not just gold and jewels. It's a piece of history, a legacy that needs to be preserved." Halo, sensing the somber mood, playfully nudged a paintbrush, sending it rolling. Shadow, ever the watchful one, barked softly, reminding them of the importance of their mission. With newfound resolve, the two women, accompanied by their faithful canine companions, set out to uncover the true nature of the treasure, vowing to protect it from those who would exploit it for selfish gains. Chapter 13. The Unexpected Guardian. The morning sun cast elongated shadows as Debbie, Nora, and the playful duo, Halo and Shadow, made their way back to the lighthouse. The waves crashed in rhythmic resonance, but the atmosphere was thick with trepidation. As they neared the lighthouse, Debbie noted an unfamiliar vehicle parked nearby. "Did you invite anyone else?" she whispered to Nora. Nora shook her head. No. It's not a villager's car, that's for sure. The distant sound of grinding gears and metal against stone emanated from the lighthouse's entrance. The group exchanged wary glances and approached with caution. Inside the tower's base, a scene of chaos greeted them. Stone tiles had shifted, revealing deep pits filled with dark, swirling water. Walls once smooth, now showcased protruding spikes and bladed pendulums that swung menacingly. At the center of this nightmarish labyrinth stood Martin, his eyes wide with terror, clutching a leather-bound journal, no doubt the same journal Debbie had discovered earlier. Shadow growled low, sensing the imminent danger, while Halo whimpered, his tail tucked between his legs. Martin's voice wavered with panic. I didn't know. The journal. It hinted at the treasure's location, but I didn't expect this. Nora's gaze hardened. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon for ships, Martin. It was built to safeguard the village's legacy. Only the keeper and his chosen apprentice, which you clearly are not know how to safely navigate its defenses. Debbie. Always the voice of reason, intervened Nora. We can't just leave him there. We need to find a way to reset the traps. The artist nodded, taking a deep breath. There's an old rhyme, a keeper's chant, that might help. But we must recite it together, as unity was the key to unlocking the lighthouse's secrets. The duo began to chant in harmonious rhythm, their voices echoing through the stone chamber. Guardian of treasures deep, awaken now from ancient sleep. By keeper's voice and heart's decree, return to rest and let paths be free. Slowly, the lighthouse responded. The spiked walls retracted, pendulums stilled, and the gaping pits sealed, returning the floor to its former state. Martin, still shaking, managed to find his feet. These aren't just mechanisms, they're elaborate traps, Martin exclaimed, pulling himself free. I am so sorry. My obsession with the legend blinded me to the dangers and the responsibility of protecting our history. Nora, her gaze softening, replied, It's not just the gold or jewels, Martin. It's the essence of our village, the memories of generations past. This isn't a prize to be won. It's a legacy to be honored. Debbie examined the area carefully, her heart weighing heavy with realization. Ben didn't die because he was pushed. He must have triggered one of these traps. It was a tragic accident. As they emerged from the lighthouse, the weight of the day's revelations heavy on their shoulders, the group realized that the true treasure was the village's rich tapestry of history, stories, and traditions. Shadow, ever the vigilant guardian, nudged the journal towards Debbie, as if reminding her of the importance of preserving stories for future generations. Meanwhile, Halo, ever the playful spirit, darted towards the waves, his joyful barks a reminder to cherish the present. And as the lighthouse stood tall, casting its protective glow over the village, it was evident that its role as the unexpected guardian would forever remain a vital part of the village's legacy. Chapter 14. Dawn's Illumination. Dawn was a palette of soft pastels, hues of pinks, blues, and golds danced upon the waters. The village buzzed with an energy it hadn't known in years, as Debbie's humble cottage became the center of planning and strategizing. As Halo and Shadow lounged in the sun, occasionally chasing after a drifting butterfly, the group gathered around Debbie's kitchen table, where a blueprint of the lighthouse was spread out. The traps reset after our chanting, but who's to say they won't activate again if someone else tries to go through? Martin pondered aloud. Nora chimed in. The lighthouse listens. It feels. We need someone or something to guide us, a sign of a keeper. Debbie, while folding dough, suddenly had a flash of inspiration. What if we don't use people? Everyone glanced at her, puzzled. What if we use weight and pressure to test and navigate the traps? Like bread dough. There was a collective silence. Then Martin's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. Like the ancient Egyptians, they used rolling logs to check for traps in pyramids. With the sun climbing higher, the plan was set in motion. Debbie, using her baking skills, prepared large rounds of dough. They were dense and heavy, perfect for the task. Martin and some villagers helped transport these to the lighthouse. As they approached the first trap, Debbie placed a dough ball onto a suspicious-looking tile. Instantly, a pit opened underneath. But with the pressure maintained by the dough, it slowly closed back. Using this method, they navigated the pitfalls, spikes, and pendulums, mapping out a safe path. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the beacon room. At its center stood the chest, just as they had left it. Shadow and Halo circled it, their tails wagging, sensing the importance of the moment. With bated breath, Debbie opened the chest. It was filled with glinting coins, ornate jewelry, and relics of immeasurable historical value. The wealth of generations of villagers gleamed back at them. "This could change everything for our village," Nora whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Debbie nodded. "But we must use it wisely." The village council decided that the treasure would be used for the collective good. Infrastructure was improved, scholarships were set up for the young, and a museum was established to house the relics and tell the village's storied past. The lighthouse was renovated and turned into a historic site, attracting visitors from all over. Debbie's bakery flourished as she introduced a new bread, aptly named Lighthouse Loaf, a tribute to their adventure. Martin penned a new book on the village's history, and Nora's paintings of the lighthouse became sought after. In the days that followed, the village transformed, not just physically, but in spirit, too. The treasure had not only brought wealth, but unity. The villagers, old and young, worked together, their common goal being the prosperity and preservation of their heritage. One evening, as the sun set, casting the lighthouse in a golden hue, Debbie sat with her furry companions on the beach. Halo playfully chased the waves, while Shadow lay by Debbie's side, his loyal gaze fixed on the horizon. She sighed contentedly. "We did good, didn't we?" Shadow barked softly in agreement, and Halo, taking a break from his antics, trotted over, nuzzling her. The treasure had brought wealth, but the true riches lay in the bonds forged, lessons learned, and the legacy that would be passed down for generations. The village had found its beacon, and it shone brighter than ever. Chapter 15: Lighthouse Legacy. A cool breeze wafted through the seaside village, carrying with it the tantalizing smell of salt and fresh bread. Seagulls sung their morning songs, harmonizing with the gentle lap of waves against the shore. The lighthouse, once a solemn sentinel guarding its treasure and history, was alive with activity. Workers moved to and fro, carefully restoring its worn bricks, while inside, historians and architects pored over old documents and blueprints, ensuring the restoration was as authentic as possible. In the heart of the hustle was Eliza. No longer the ambitious realtor with eyes solely on profit, she had taken it upon herself to help in the lighthouse's restoration. But what surprised many was her partnership with Nora. The artist, with her intricate knowledge of the lighthouse and its past, was the perfect complement to Eliza's logistical expertise. "It's amazing to think this old lighthouse held such a secret," mused Eliza, as she watched a group of children playing near the shore. Nora, brush in hand as she recreated a mural from a faded photograph of the lighthouse's interior, replied, "It wasn't just the treasure, Eliza. It was the stories, the history, the souls that walked its spiraling stairs. We're not just preserving bricks and mortar, but memories." Eliza nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'm grateful for this second chance." As the days turned into weeks, the village watched as the lighthouse transformed. On the day of its inauguration as a museum, Villagers and tourists alike flocked to the site. There were exhibits detailing its history, artifacts from the treasure, and a special corner dedicated to the shipwrecks and legends of the sea. At the entrance stood a large canvas painted by Nora. It depicted the lighthouse in all its glory, with Shadow and Halo playfully running around and Debbie, with a basket of her famous lighthouse loaf, looking on with a smile. The painting was aptly titled The Guardians. Debbie, in her simple dress, stood a little away from the crowd, her loyal companions by her side. Halo, true to his nature, tried to chase after a fluttering leaf, while Shadow sat stoically, taking in the surroundings. "It's wonderful, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Turning, she saw Martin, his glasses perched on his nose and a notebook in hand. "To think we almost lost all of this," he continued. Debbie smiled. "It's the heart of the village that saved it. The lighthouse might have been the keeper of treasures, but the true heart lies within the community." As the day wore on, Debbie, Halo, and Shadow decided to take their leave. They slowly made their way to the beach, the same spot where they'd first heard the whispers by the waves. The sun was now setting, casting a radiant glow on the lighthouse. Debbie sat down, with Halo snuggling next to her and Shadow laying his head on her lap. She looked at the lighthouse, now a beacon of history and unity, and whispered, "Thank you." The waves seemed to reply with a gentle caress on the shore, and as the trio sat there, basking in the golden hue, the lighthouse stood tall and proud, its legacy restored, and its stories ready to be told for generations to come. As the stars began to twinkle, Debbie felt a familiar itch of adventure. The world was vast, and mysteries abounded. With Halo and Shadow by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The horizon held promises, and the whispers of the waves sang tales of adventures yet to come.